Hello, my name is Omnia Salem, and today we will be discussing the emotional side of slavery. The emotional side of slavery is rarely talked about or is being taught in schools or within society. The topic of slavery is always covered and viewed from one perspective, which mainly covers the slave trade, auction, and the roles within society during this era. Many slaves went through emotional trauma due to the brutality and harshness they had faced, such as family separation, lynching, torturing, women being raped, and many years of injustice. These were the main factors that affect their emotional state of mind and caused them long-term trauma. The movie here portrays the roller coasters of emotion a slave has to go through. They are constantly scared of being torn apart from their families, continually trying to find hope of gaining their freedom one day, or living in fear due to their master's inhuman treatment. Additionally, the movie The 13 shows the impact of injustice on African Americans. In the film, Khalif Broder held in New York City Rikers Island jail for 3 years with no trials in solitary confinement. It had affected his mental health and caused him severe depression. Shortly after his release, he committed suicide after suffering from psychological damage of his cruel imprisonment. This relates back to how many slaves committed suicide due to the injustice and how vicious they were being treated. In our video, we'll be covering how slavery affected slaves' self-esteem by John, family separation by Chris, also how slaves express their emotions through songs by Fatma, and lastly, trauma and immunization by Jude. Thank you.
My name is Jonathan Dose, and my part of the video is about effects of slavery on self-esteem. I would like to start with a quote from Taylor and Francis group online, which says, "The psychological ramifications of racism have been well documented. The article suggests that the ramifications are a consequence of psychological injuries or external violations and assaults that ensue when one is subject to racism-related experiences. Racism-related psychological injuries have been shown to increase stress, trauma, anxiety, fear, anger, depression, while reducing the overall quality of life for African Americans." So as we've studied all year, an important part of the perpetuation of slavery was not only physical, but psychological. Taylor and Francis group online also has another quote that says, "African Americans have often been ascribed stigmatized identities, informed by racism, which promotes racial and gender expectations for African Americans. These negative racial and gender expectations provide the foundation and reinforcement of negative African American stereotypes, promoting social rejection and unacceptance." This year, we dove into this theme when we studied the Jezebel and Mammy trope. The Jezebel image was used to take the worth away from a black woman by labeling her as a simply sexual being who is completely devoid of morals. This description acutely aligns with the quote from Taylor and Francis that says, "Shame is used as an emotional response to threaten one's self-esteem, social status, or acceptance." And it doesn't get more shameful than the Jezebel trope, because the black woman's sexuality was used against her to make not only others hate her, but to make her hate herself. This is just an example of how slavery was used on a wide scale to lower the self-esteem of an entire group of people in order to continue to profit from the free labor of those people. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Chris Lasser, and I will be discussing the experiences and the effects it had on the family of those who were in slavery. So many families were separated because of slavery. They were basically pulled apart from their families by slave owners and by other means. So they had to use letters to communicate with each other. I will read one of them to you now. They used letters to advocate for helping to find who they lost. The author in Where They Find My People issued that she wanted information about her mother. She says that information is wanted of my mother, who I left in Franklin County, Virginia in 1844. I was sold in Richmond, Virginia to Salem Colon. I merely belong to Robert Rogers. I am very anxious to hear from my mother, and any information in relation to her whereabouts will be thankfully received. My mother's name is Betty and was sold by Coil Briggs to James Frank. Any information by letter addressed to the Colored Tennessee box 1150 will be thankfully received. So that letter states that many people found it awkward and weird when people talked about people missed their families, and people talked about how their families were disappeared and they hadn't heard from them. So there was no email or phone to contact them. They had to basically wait to hear from them or see them in person. So that was a long time of waiting. And in the movie Harriet, they also have this, but in Harriet it's played a little differently. It's more of they don't hear anything until they see them physically, so no one really knows what's going on, so everyone assumes the worst because they didn't have any idea of what's going on. So they just brush it off. And in most cases, they simulate the fear and the fear of being hurt by the white man, because the white man basically owned them and they had no power. So they had to fight for what was theirs. So in conclusion, they rose up and banded united together to help end what was rightfully theirs, and to come together to overpower the opposing side, to become free.
Hello, my name is Fatma Abdul-Rasul, and throughout my portion of the project, I will be talking about how slaves were able to express their feelings and emotions through songs, and also how they talked about their hardships through songs. While slaves were not allowed to talk as they worked, they were able to sing. One of the main things that they did through singing was communicate with one another. Slaves from different countries, tribes, and cultures used singing as a form of communication. Many songs had hidden messages of plans to escape and directions for how to head north on the Underground Railroad. Because slaves were always around their masters, they learned to disguise the true meaning of their songs, hiding politically challenging content. One of the examples that they used of songs as communication was Wade in the Water. This song teaches slaves to hide and make it through by getting in the water. Harriet Tubman tells slaves to get off the trail and get into the water to make sure the dog slave catchers wouldn't be able to sniff out their trail and soon catch them. One of the other things that they expressed through their songs was emotion. As songs being the only emotional and spiritual outlet for slaves, songs contained hopes and dreams, frustration, and fears. These songs helped slaves feel relieved as an aching heart felt relieved by tears. Slaves sang out their struggle, loneliness, sorrow, hope, and determination for a new and better life. Whether it was sorrow, joy, or hope, slaves sang. One of the examples used for their emotions was We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder. This song is based on Jacob's Ladder biblical story. Its lyrics hold out hope that enslaved can escape and enjoy freedom.
Hi, my name is Judah Lukimeje, and I will be focusing on the trauma and dehumanization of Black African Americans. And one way this was performed was through lynchings. Lynchings was a method of social and racial control meant to terrorize Black Americans into submission. And this became widely practiced in the U.S. South from roughly 1877, the end of post Civil War Reconstruction, through 1950. And through this process, hundreds of Black people were lynched based on accusations of wild crimes, like it could include murder, arson, robbery, rape. And at the turn of the 20th century, at least 100 lynchings were being reported each year. And then in 1892, a record 230 people were lynched, including 160 Black folk. And then the lynching of Black and white women, the IWB Wells PDF, Wells indicates the white hysteria about the rape of white women by Black men only justified the barbarism of white Southern men, effectively masking all their violence against a woman, both Black and white. And this was because they used this as a desperate control to control white women's sexual behavior and can have control over Black women. And they created the scapegoat of the figure of the Black rapist to do this. And then many victims of the lynchings were murdered without being accused of any crime. They were killed for violating social crimes or racial expectations, just such as speaking to a white man with little respect or just flirting with a white woman. And white mobs often use these criminal accusations to justify their lynchings. A common claim black men was perceived as sexual transgressions against white women, and then charges of rape were often routinely fabricated. These allegations were used to enforce segregation and advance stereotypes of black men as the violent, hypersexual aggressors, just as an attempt to subjugate and control black men and women.